Hey, my name's Tyler Bryan. I'm with the Saskatchewan Association of Watersheds. We're at the Great Reservoir of Wakamo here in the city of Moose Jaw, and I want to go over Veliger sampling. And what we're specifically looking at with these sampling procedures is Veligers, which is a life stage of aquatic invasive species, specifically like zebra mussels, and that's their larval stage. And so what we're doing is utilizing this net here to hopefully capture those larvae as they're in the actually like mixed up in the water. Yeah, we're going to go through the protocol with the sampling procedure itself, and more importantly is the decontamination of our equipment. So before our sampling even begins, we need to know what the actual clarity of the water is, and so we're using a Saki disc, and this is just a simple disc that's using contrasting colors to allow us to visually see it as it's going through the water column, and we're measuring how far we can actually see it through that water column to determine the actual clarity of the water. And so at this location, it's fairly turbid water, so we're only getting about 1.5 meters, or sorry, just a half a meter of distance between the surface of the water and where the disc actually becomes invisible to the naked eye. So that is just a simple test to determine water clarity between our sample lakes, and then we'll move on to the actual netting procedure. So back to the net. The net is a fairly simple construction. We have 64 micron netting that funnels the water from the starting point there all the way to our collection cup, and the collection cup itself is screwed on just like that, and on the inside there is more netting material that allows water to pass through, but does not allow minute, not microscopic, but very small organisms or even debris from passing through this cup so that we can collect it. And at the very base of the cup itself is a weight that really just helps it sink into the water, and also with throwing it. So we have the rope here that's connected to the net, and on the rope itself we're actually marked out every single meter, and so that's measuring for us, like that's giving us a visual indicator of how the distance of how long that net is getting dragged through the water, and we're using that to calculate actually how many liters are traveling through that net, like how many liters of water that net's actually capturing. And so the distance of the net, the distance of that pole, is really important to keep in mind. The other aspect with the rope is that we don't want to lose it, right? I don't know about you, but I don't like swimming when I'm doing field work. Like, I mean, sometimes it sounds nice on a really hot day, but we got sampling to get to, and we can't take that break to go swimming for the net. So it's really important to find a location that is a good tie-off point. This can be a simple knot. It does not have to be anything crazy, because it's not actually going to be holding any weight back or anything like that. This is just a safety precaution, just so that we're not actually losing the net in the water. Tossing this net out is just thinking about your rope placement. So I've kind of grouped up the rope in a centralized location here on the dock, because I mean we're not necessarily worried about the net pulling us into the water, but we are concerned about just shortening our distance on our throw, about potentially having this netting come back if it's quickly after it's released. It might kind of come back and swing around, those sorts of things. So just being always mindful of where your rope placement is. The next aspect of actually doing these horizontal tows is grouping up the netting itself, so that when it's deployed, this weighted system is actually, you want it the furthest away from you, because this is going to travel the furthest because it has the most amount of density. And so grouping it up so it's a little bit more aerodynamic, which is really critical. As you can see, it's a little windy behind me, so we're going to see how far I can actually get this to go. A mark here, so we got a 1, 2, 3, And I'm always trying to keep that net underneath the water, so my speed of the retrieve is always dependent on that. So I had 4 meters in total that I was actually able to capture. We're in the spring here, and we're not really worried about algae or aquatic vegetation that may be caught in the net. Like, this net is actually pretty clean even after we just pulled it out of the water. But when it's later in the summer, or maybe there's just more debris in the water itself wherever we're sampling, this is just tap water. So it's just a squeeze bottle of regular tap water, and it's a little bit tricky in the wind, but using my body to kind of block the wind a little bit.
Okay.
Just utilizing this tap water to kind of drain everything into the net. And we don't necessarily need to do that for every time that we're throwing the net. It's really just that last time that we're throwing out the net for our last pull to collect our last sample that we'll include in the collection cup. And I'm letting it kind of drain out of that collection cup there. And I'm helping that along by just bringing it up to the sides of the actual collection cup where the netting is, where the screen is, and just allowing it to drain out so that we can kind of concentrate our sample, because we're gonna have to do this multiple times, and we're kind of trying to be mindful of the amount of water that we're capturing, because the water itself isn't what we're looking for, it's the things that are in the water. And then it also will help with the amount of preservative that we're gonna use to preserve the sample. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but now that it's kind of stopped dripping like that, I'm gonna unscrew it. And so now we can see we actually captured some aquatic invertebrates there that are scuttling around in the water in the sample. But overall, that's a fairly dense sample. That there's mostly aquatic vegetation in there, along with some aquatic invertebrates. Hopefully, there's no actual, Veligers of aquatic invasive species, but that's what we're looking for. And then we have a 500 ml sample bottle here that I'm just getting the rest of the sample in. So let's pretend that this is our last pull that we just did, and we're looking to clean out the sample cup itself. So we're gonna wanna utilize the squeeze bottle once again to capture any of the remaining material that might be in here, because as you can see now, it's fairly clean. I'd like to see it a little bit more clean than that. Just trying to get all of the material that we captured in our pull into the sample itself. And so that's just from one pull that we captured, just the little bit of water there. Hypothetically, we might see up to 6 or 7 pulls, just depending on distance tossed. Essentially, we're trying to cover about 22 meters of water, like through the net. That equates to roughly 1,500 liters of water that's actually passed through the net. That's theoretical, of course. Like, there's not actual measurements we're actually measuring volume, we're just measuring distance. But theoretically, over 22 meters of distance traveled with the net equals roughly just over 1,500 meters or liters of water. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually done sampling, and I'm just attempting to rinse off as much debris as I possibly can with the net. Sometimes it's best to utilize like water that you've transported from the tap or some sort of clean water source. This isn't part of the actual decontamination process. Well, a portion of it is. I should clarify that what we're trying to do is actually clean off all of the debris off of the netting, so that if there's any trapped particles or anything like that, like vegetation, things like that, or potentially veligers that are on the surface of the net, are potentially rinsed off. And the water here is, it's tough to say that it's clean, but there's at least not a ton of floating vegetation as of yet anyways. So just utilizing this available water source to just kind of take off the debris off the net, or potentially if you have portable water, then utilizing that. So let's go to the truck and we'll actually talk about the exact decontamination process to disinfect the netting and all the other equipment. And here is our sample sheet that we're using. So these are different data points that we're looking at, and they're fairly simple. Also with water clarity, we're also including water temperature and water pH, and we're utilizing just a simple water meter to collect those. And those are just at surface water. So like right at the sample site, right at the surface water, like whatever the surface water temperature is, whatever the surface water pH is, those are the things that we're recording. We're also looking at coordinates of the actual sample that we took, a site description, we're looking at like landmarks, like we're at a regional park right now, or a city park right now, so we would note that. The site ID is something that is a unique identifier that we'll be using not only for the sample sheet, but we'll also be placing that on the bottle itself, and on that bottle we will be putting a sample number, some defining characteristics of the sample, but making sure that the most important information is repeated. So we have like the location, the site description, and then we'll also place the actual sample ID on there, so that if that label gets damaged, at least we'll know where the sample came from. And then we'll also be recording the distance, so our haul length. So each throw, so number one, say we had 5, 4, 6. Essentially, we're looking for a total of something that's either 22 or above meters, and we'll calculate how many liters we captured by timesing each haul by 70.7, and that'll give us our liters per meter. And then at the end of that, that'll give us our volume. And so we're looking at a total. We're trying to find a total volume of somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 liters, as we can see right there. So that's what we want to record. Here is our disc reading, and then just some defining characteristics of the lake itself. And these are fairly subjective, so we're just looking at, like, is there a moderate, presence, a heavy presence of algae, what kind of tow did we do? Well, we did our horizontal. We were not going to be doing vertical. Where did we throw the vertical toss from? And for us, it was a dock. So these are just a simple overview of the data that we're looking for. And so now that we're back at the truck, we have our sample here. I won't actually use any ethanol to preserve our sample, because we're just going to be tossing this. This was just for informational purposes only. We're not actually out testing today. But if we were, let's say that in total we've collected about close to a third. That's perfect. All we really need is a 60% concentration of that ethanol. So as long as there is by volume 60% or greater of ethanol in the sample, then that will help preserve those organisms, along with the alcohol. We'll need to put in a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, and what that does is help stabilize the acidity of the alcohol itself, because we're dealing with organisms, potentially organisms, hopefully not, but like zebra mussel larvae actually are forming their shell. And so if we have a high acidity sample, that shell will actually dissolve, and that could actually just over time liquefy the organism, and it'll make it won't be able to be detectable in the screening process. So that's why it's really important to include that baking soda to help stabilize the sample. So then once that's all done, lid's on nice and tight, it can be stored away and it's ready to be shipped to the lab for testing. And with decontamination, we must always assume that the lake that we're sampling is contaminated, even if there hasn't been a verified sample on that lake. Like in Saskatchewan here, for example, there has been no detections of aquatic invasive species. That does not mean that that water body is free from aquatic invasive species, right? Because it could have been introduced, it could have not been detected last year, but now it's grown to a point where it's able to be detected, right? And so we must always assume that every single water body that we're testing is contaminated, and so we need to be very diligent about decontaminating any gear that was introduced to that water body that will be reintroduced to another water body. So for our organization, we're typically utilizing docks, like already existing structures. We're just throwing our nets off of shorelines because we're trying to minimize the amount of interaction that we're having with each water body. But if we say we're using waders to wade out into from the shoreline to throw the nets, or if we're using marine equipment like a boat, then we would have to go through its own separate decontamination process. But for this, just for the netting, because the way that our organization does it is we just utilize the netting and the rope and the disc itself. And so there's many different chemicals that are used for decontaminating equipment, and some are very caustic. So like bleach is a good example of that. Bleach is an incredibly effective way to decontaminate your equipment, but it's very caustic, it's very toxic. It's difficult to deal with because, like, if it gets on clothing, it's going to, stain that clothing, discolor the clothing. And so, and then there's other like specially made chemicals that are just not as readily available. And for our organization anyways, it's not something that we can simply utilize because we have remote staff that are across the whole province that are doing the sampling. And so to get them specialized chemicals is kind of difficult. So we utilize white vinegar. There are some downsides with using white vinegar, mainly the amount of soak time that needs to happen. We control for that by having a soak bucket, and so this is like a bucket that is utilized just for soaking the netting material. And so just simply pouring it onto the equipment. Vinegar is very readily available. It's fairly, inexpensive, at least compared to other options. And it also is less harsh on equipment, but you don't want to let the equipment soak for too long. We've had issues in the past with the actual adhesive from the sample cuts themselves. Actually became it started to break down. The acidity actually started breaking down that adhesive, and the netting itself pulled away from the cupping. So in pure vinegar, it needs to be a minimum and it's also debris free as well. So like large debris is free from the sample. It needs to be, if there is large debris, it needs to be an hour. But if it's large debris free, like what we have right now, it needs to be a minimum of 20 minutes. And so, wrong lid. So utilizing that and just agitating the water, getting my cup in here, or sorry, not the water, but the vinegar itself, agitating, kind of like what happens in a washing machine. Just spreading that vinegar around in the sample, and then letting it sit for in this enclosed container for that 20-minute period at minimum. It's not bad to go even longer than that, but just to not allow it to soak overnight like this. Like, we don't want to let it sit for just hours on end in this vinegar. So we'll just assume that this equipment's been soaking in the vinegar for over 20 minutes, and we're ready to utilize it. It's important to try to capture as much of the vinegar as possible. We can reutilize the vinegar itself. It can't sit for more than a, I believe it's 72-hour period, like after it's been used for decontamination. Like obviously if it's in the bottle, it's totally fine, totally shelf stable. But once it's been utilized for decontamination, it can't sit for more than 72 hours. So but it can be, within that time period, it can be reused to decontaminate netting. So like we can just keep the vinegar in this tote, and it can be continuously reused through like a sample period. Now there are caveats to that. We also can't have a bunch of debris just floating around in the vinegar too, right? So if the vinegar itself is starting to become overly contaminated with debris, then it is time to swap it out for some cleaner vinegar. But for right now we don't have that, but we do have one stinky net. So just utilizing, like, away from the water. We don't have to make it perfect. We just don't want to, just have vinegar introduced to the waterway, just like that. Obviously, more water is totally fine, like more tap water is totally fine. Giving it that rinse, rinsing everything before we're going back out, and also inspecting it too. Like sometimes in these threads, debris can be caught. Just making sure that everything is debris free right before we go back out and introduce this net to a new water body. So I would argue that decontamination is probably the most important aspect of what we're doing. It's really important to make sure that the equipment that we're introducing into that water body is without a doubt, not containing any active aquatic invasive species, right? As we're going out and sampling for them, we definitely don't want to be spreading them. And I think that's a really important aspect of this. And so understanding the methodology is really important to the success of this program. But I really appreciate you watching all the way until the end, and happy testing.